the morning. It is St. Patty's Day around here, everybody.
Yeah, happy St. Patty's Day.
Nolan's wearing green to celebrate. And this is No More Mondays. Here, we do not have green beer because it is 10 a.m. where we live. And also because we're going to talk about health and nutrition, and I'm not sure that's on my plan. However, I want to welcome you to the show. This is a program where we believe you can have a thriving career or business and an amazing life on your terms. And what I do is bring you guests who not only prove that fact, but have great advice to help you live and work authentically. And our health is a huge part of our overall well-being, entrepreneurship, leadership, high performance careers. We all have one thing in common: demand on our time, demand on our energy. Heck, even life friggin' demands a lot of us these days. And when things get busy, guess what's the first thing to go? Our health. We skip workouts, we get takeout meals, maybe a hungry man, which we talked about a little bit in the green room. Too much coffee, amen. It's not exactly a formula that has longevity, has good health benefits, or even is sustainable. But what if you could build a sustainable lifestyle and be healthy without feeling like it was another full-time job that was super restrictive? And today we are cutting out the noise with Nolan Cunningham. He's a strength and conditioning coach who knows exactly how to make health and wellness work for you and real life. Nolan has coached CrossFit. Yay, I finally get to talk about CrossFit on this show. He's trained high performance professionals, and he even has a background in software development. So naturally, he is about creating efficient, process-driven solutions for busy people. He makes fitness and nutrition simpler, and he's going to make your life better with some fantastic tips and really sound advice coming your way. So without further ado, let's get into it. Nolan, welcome to No More Mondays.
Love it. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I'm excited to chat.
Nolan and I have had many a question. We've known each other for a while. We've had many a conversation about CrossFit and food and soapboxes and all kinds of things when it comes to trying to live healthier in a world that just continues to consume that health and kind of disrupt and take away from it. And I'm curious, Nolan, as we kind of kick this off, why is this such a struggle? Why is it so hard to prioritize our health? You know, we're super high achievers. We can do so much well, but for some reason, this is something that we sacrifice and we don't take great care of our bodies. Why is this the thing we sacrifice? Why aren't we good at this?
Totally agree with that too. I think it's a great question because high achievers are always thinking about how they can one up themselves, how they can get that extra 1%, especially in their business. Can they up their numbers in their business or in their career? But oftentimes that's at the detriment of what we're doing to ourselves. And it's easy to put it on the back burner because we can still maintain that progress in other facets of our life while running on empty, while having a spare tire on your back left axle of your car. You could still drive all the way to your destination, but you're kind of putting something on the back burner, and sooner or later, those issues are going to start to manifest in pretty serious ways. So I think the short answer is because we can get away with it in the short term. But if we have a long-term view, and as business owners, high achievers, we all should have a long-term view. It's a little bit more challenging to maintain that unhealthy lifestyle for years and years.
Well, and even the car that's got the thing dragging in the back eventually is going to break down, end up on the side of the road, or end up in the shop, which tends to be what happens when we push ourselves to the nth limit. You know, we do irreparable damage and end up way further in a hole than we would have if we just tried to keep things in check over time.
Totally. Yep. There are small things we could do day in and day out that don't really necessarily take too much out of you, but they'll move the needle in a really positive way for your health and wellness. And it'll keep you out of to like damage, and really hit the analogy on like even more, to keep you out of the auto body shop. You'll just keep doing those small habits. That way you can stay out of the shop.
Absolutely. I think there's this assumption. I thought this isn't me. Also, just so you all know, most of the questions I have asked apply to me. So I am not a hypocrite over here. I will fully tell you. And also, we got Noble, and I'm repping Roaring for CrossFit. I left
Oh, there
it
you
on
go.
specifically because hi, Scott and Laurel. She listens to the show. They're great friends of mine who own our gym, and it's an excellent community, which is a piece of the support system that kind of keeps me going, because I
Absolutely.
think there's an assumption, or this is something I can fall into, which is this idea that like you have to completely overhaul to be good at this, right? I have to eat exactly right. Perfection. We fall into that perfection trap and don't feel like there's a way to do this maybe like well enough. This feast or famine doesn't serve us. Talk to me a little
Totally.
bit about that mentality.
Yeah, and you're a fan of the Pareto principle, right?
Oh, I love a good 80-20 rule.
Yeah. So basically, for your listeners, Pareto principle: 80% of the effects or outcomes really only come from 20% of the causes or inputs. So if you could change 20% of your inputs, you're going to get a huge bang for your buck. You do not have to be perfect, but coming from someone who was kicking themselves when they were not getting perfect scores on my exams back in school, I can really appreciate the perfectionist mindset, but truly you can move the needle very far just changing a couple of small habits. And you kind of hit the nail on the head too. Having a support system and people who embrace that progress over perfection mindset really help you recenter when you're just going, trying to be perfect time in and time out.
Well, and I feel like perfectionism comes up on No More Mondays a lot, because perfectionism rarely leads to No More Mondays because it puts these boundaries and our expectations on ourselves that we're just never ever going to reach. And perfect example is if I eat too much gluten-free, probably A2 or dairy-free cheese pizza because I have so many food issues. If I eat too much pizza on a Saturday night, at one point in time, I would have said, I ate a whole bunch last night. Might as well just keep going. And you eat the thing the next day because you had this one quote unquote slip up. But if you stop thinking about it that way and you think about it as the opposite of the 80-20, the 20% I'm allowed to be flexible on, it kind
Yep,
of starts to change how you look at this whole system.
totally. One of the things I love working with some of my clients is on the 5 days in the week, you're setting a routine, you're kind of doing your thing, you're moving and grooving, going to work or logging online, whatever you're doing, you can really systematize those 5 days throughout the week. And you can, even on the weekends, give yourself a rating, A, B, C, or D. You don't have to have perfect A's on your habits to keep moving the needle forward. You can have some B and C days, um, have some cookies during the holidays, like have a pizza on Friday night, and you could still, in the aggregate, keep moving forward in a really positive way.
As my math teacher dad used to tell me, B's are good grades, but I never got them because I was too much of a perfectionist that needed the A's. But if you're getting F's, you ain't gonna graduate, people. So I'm curious. Here's some things that I know are common in the health and wellness, as far as, let's say, myths or things we tell ourselves.
Mm.
I don't have time. I need to spend an hour plus at the gym, which goes back to I don't have time. Eating healthy is too expensive. How do you get people to rethink all of that, and kind of how do you debunk those maybe myths slash limiting beliefs?
Totally. So, a couple of pieces. One, everybody's out to sell you something, and sometimes they're adding value to their life, to your life. Sometimes they're not. They're just detracting from your life to make a buck for themselves. And health and wellness is rife with these examples. A lot of these are truly our myths that you were talking about earlier. There are a couple of really easy ways to think about whether or not what you're seeing, hearing, or consuming is actually based on merit, or if it's someone who's just trying to sell you some snake oil. But in the grand scheme of things, just pulling back to the 30,000 foot view, you can eat healthy and you could eat just some fresh veggies, some rice and beans, and you could have a very healthy meal. You don't necessarily have to do that every meal, but that's super cheap. In terms of time, you can get some serious progress in by going for micro walks, a couple of walks a day, instead of spending an hour and a half at the gym every day. Like, there are some really easy, sustainable habits you can establish without spending a lot of your resources, time, energy, or money.
Ooh, uh, by the way, stick a pin in snake oil. We're going back to that. But before we do, you mentioned this idea of like systematizing the week.
Yep.
And now we just talked about, let's say, habit stacking. How's that fit together? Give us an example of how all of that might look during the 5 days that we're in our system versus the other 2 days where we maybe are flexible in our system?
Totally. So, couple ones. I'm just going to go through a couple of pillars. One pillar that we should all be considering is movement. How are we moving? Some folks like to wear wearables. They'll have like an Apple Watch that'll track how many steps they take in a day or how many times they stand in a day. You can stack that movement with walks while you're answering emails, for example. You could take a walk around the block. Another easy stack is when you're getting ready in the morning and you're making your coffee while the coffee maker is running. You can chop up some apples. Just really simple stuff that when you say habit stacking, it means you're just putting two habits together and you kind of associate them with one another. So it's almost like classical conditioning. I know you're a psychology nerd like I am. When one thing happens, you do the other thing. I'll drop into a deep squat when I'm brushing my teeth, for example. Just a bunch of habit stacks that you just stick in throughout the day when you're already doing something else. That just is a more sustainable and healthy habit. And the time's already wasted, so you might as well stack it on top of it.
This might seem like really, like, seriously, 2 squats while I'm brushing my teeth. Hopefully you're brushing your teeth for longer than 2 squats. It makes a difference. But I think this goes into something that's like the 50,000 foot view, which is like systemically as a society, we're way too sedentary. So these small things actually can make a difference because it's just taking one less sit down away from us.
Absolutely. And the kicker is these aren't small things because they snowball. You're going to start small for sure, but they're going to start to build on themselves. You're going to start to get addicted to dropping into a deep squat. I promise. You're going to start to spend more time trying to fit in walks here and there because you're loving the fresh air, the sunlight on your face. This is going to start to snowball into something bigger, and they sound small now, but if you're consistent with the small stuff, they build on themselves into something that's super sustainable and really moves the needle.
Well, and what I think is really interesting here's the big thing, is it seems like a chore at first, then it becomes a habit that you kind of can't do without because you realize how much better you feel. And that's all over physically, mentally. You probably are in a better mood, you have more energy. And so if you can get through the initial lift, it all becomes easier.
Totally. Yeah. And I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole, so pull me back if I do, but it's all a system. Like you talk about how physically, when you're moving, it also impacts your psyche. Mentally, you feel better. Your emotions are turned around. You sleep better. When you're hydrating, you get to perform better when you're out for a walk or when you're eating your meal, and you get better sleep and rest. You're more focused. And then they just feed on each other. It's a self-feeding cycle. So it's all a system that, to your point, as you work on one, the other ones feel better too.
Yeah, that's a good rabbit hole. I like rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And speaking of rabbits, we're going to go back to snake oil.
Oh, yes.
So we're talking about systems and processes that we can use to, I don't love the word hack, but in a way, because it's not, you're creating habits, but we're talking about some systems and processes and just ways that we can adopt things that make our lives healthier. But what Nolan brought up earlier was this idea of like, there's a lot of claims out there about systems and processes that can make your health better, but really that isn't what they are. So, side note, I am a child of the 80s, which is when the fad diet became a thing. And so there's different versions of the fad diet now in these, magic bullet, lose 40 pounds, magic food delivery type things, or the workouts, right? There's lots of claims out there, but we need to be aware. Talk to me about this.
Totally. Yeah. Another way to see it is you just look on a bookshelf at a used bookstore, the health and wellness section. Oh my gosh, all the recipe books that take out all fat. It's like, well, we need fat. So
Hey, I grew up. If you are a woman who grew up in the late 80s and 90s, you know all about the low fat diet. Clearly a low fat Twinkie that's packed with more sugar is better than just eating the damn Twinkie. Not that you need to be eating Twinkies at all, but that is exactly what the late 80s and early 90s were all about. And then it came Atkins.
Oh, sure.
Those are the big ones I remember.
Absolutely. Yeah, they all come in different flavors depending on the year, I'm sure. And we have them now. They're just in a different format oftentimes. And Instagram ads or podcasts, but they're all of the same ilk of trying to sell you something because it's a very emotional and personal experience, especially nutrition, but generally health across the board, like working out, eating, sleeping. We're all looking for easy solutions, right? Because we're busy people. We like mental shortcuts, and stories are really compelling to us. So, as a social creature, we want to hear the stories and the anecdotes that make a lot of sense in our brain. And we also want to feel better. Like that's human nature, that's natural. Uh, there are a couple of different things that I like to do to take the emotion out of the equation when I'm consuming some of this content, just so I know that I'm not buying into my biases or my mental shortcuts,
Mm.
because we all have them. Making sure that I'm using an objective approach when I'm faced with something that is trying to inform or persuade me to change my health habits.
Ooh, I feel like there's a system coming here.
You
But I
know,
want let's peel back the onion a little, and we're just going to call spades a spades. We're talking about the health and the media claims that we see in social media, for instance, is a big one.
yep.
I'll give you a very perfect example. I am now a middle-aged woman in my middle 40s, which means I get lots of ads about take this hormone and you will magically have no belly and you will lose 40 pounds. Or Nolan and I were talking about the V-Shred guy before we came on, and he's like, "Oh man, I hate that guy." I just outed you, but just it's these extremist things that I think you have to be very, very cautious of, because there, unfortunately, in health, there is not a magic wand.
Totally. There's not a magic wand, but you can move the needle pretty far with small, sustainable habits, like we were talking about earlier. But a magic bullet, magic wand, whatever you want to call it, that doesn't exist. There is no true hack. It takes consistency and a little bit of effort, but you can do it. Totally. Anybody can do it. It just takes a little bit of time and effort to consistently chip away to meet your goal. That's just the end of it.
And I want to talk a little bit more about this, like how do we evaluate claims and how do we know what we're buying is legitimate and healthy and not a scam? I do want to talk more about that, but something's on my mind specifically as I'm taking a walk down memory lane in the fad diets of the 80s and 90s. Those, like, it took a long time to undo these psychological impacts that kind of stuff had on me in very formative years
Yeah,
as a little short Italian with a big butt growing up in Kate Moss land. For any of you who know waif time of modeling, that's exactly what it was. And so, like, I still sometimes think, oh, less fat is better, or the low carb thing is better. But ultimately, those are core food groups that give us energy, and it's all about figuring out how to balance them. And this is actually a place where balance comes in, right?
totally. No, I appreciate that lead in too, because I was thinking about this earlier. You really jogged my memory. This is all emotional. Like we're in our formative years, we're brought up a certain way with our parents, right? And we like interact with others in society. We intake all these images and videos and what have you, that kind of inform who we are, how we view the world, and what we define as success, right? And just on a baseline, what is success? What is good? And a lot of the times it's positioned counter to what would actually be healthful. Extremely skinny, for example, some people are naturally extremely skinny, which is their body type, which is awesome. That's great. I love that. Some people are not naturally skinny. That
Good
is
for you.
also
I'm not one of them.
great. But that being put on a pedestal for everyone to see, that's not necessarily the best way to position success or value for everyone in the world. Same with the way we act with one another. Some people are very stoic and not emotive at all. They don't show any emotion. Some people are better at expressing their emotions. If anyone's been in a long-term relationship, I'm sure they can relate to the fact that being able to express your emotions is really important. So being the stoic, stone-faced person isn't always the best way to approach that dynamic even though that's what the media kind of portrays it as. So this is all pretty emotional, and it ties to our identity, and it's pretty deep rooted, like you said.
Which ends up meaning this, like, essentially when it comes back to this like media type stuff,
Mm.
the fads, they're predatory, right? They're preying on emotions. And I'll take a minute and I'll get on the soapbox that's next to Nolan, because I see this, he sees this happening in the health and wellness space, and that's kind of preying on every human's emotion to want to feel and look better. Even if they've already got a 6-pack, they probably want the 8-pack, right? We all have a thing when it comes to like our connection with our physical self. I see this in just the general coaching space with the same kind of like predatory broad scope. Hey, I'm going to fix your business, or I'm going to help you make a ton of money. But again, it comes back to this idea that there is no replacement for process and some hard work and some commitment. And that's really what we're talking about here, and why you have to be careful of these claims that say you won't have to put in the hard work, the process, or the commitment, because that's just ain't how it works.
Totally. No, I think you had an example before. 1 month, $300,000 or something like that, turn your business around. Yeah.
We've all seen it. Oh yeah, here, buy my $5,000 program and I'll help you build a 6-figure coaching business in 30 days. Like, okay, maybe 10 plus years ago when there were a lot less coaches out there, that could be the case, maybe. But certainly not now. Just like me taking, I don't know, a Good Belly vitamin or whatever the heck ad I get for the women's hormone multivitamins isn't going to make me lose 40 pounds in 8 days.
Right. It's triggering your emotions. There's a part of your brain called the amygdala, and it's taps into your fear and anxiety. And that's exactly
The
what
lizard.
these do. Yeah, the lizard brain. Yep.
Yeah. The lizard, or the caveman brain, who's reacting to things that we don't actually have in our environments anymore, right? There is no saber-toothed tiger who's chasing you down so that you have to run away from the cave. But unfortunately, evolution hasn't caught up with that fact. So what we can do is use the brains we have to be discerning about these kind of things. And so here comes a framework. Here comes technology, Nolan, with a little bit of a process on how we can assess whether or not we should buy into a health claim or a health process. So what's this look like?
Totally. Preface before we jump into the framework itself, we're in the context of engaging in content that we want to learn from. Like sometimes I'll throw on some brain candy on YouTube, honestly, when I just want to relax. I don't want to learn from that. I might switch into a context where I do want to learn, and then I'll subconsciously initiate this framework. But sometimes we just consume just to turn off or be distracted for a while. This is in the context of when someone is trying to persuade us, or we're in the context of wanting to learn about health and wellness, or someone's trying to persuade us about health and wellness. First thing I like thinking about is looking at the content itself, assessing the claim itself on its merits. Is the health and wellness claim based on scientific evidence? Can I look up that science? Does the person delivering it give me access to looking up that science? Is it just an anecdote? Is it based on peer-reviewed studies? Is it a meta-analysis? We can get really nerdy if we want, but basically, how strong is the evidence for this claim?
And is there any?
If any. Yeah. A lot of times it's just a story about how their brother-in-law, Billy, did this one thing once, so everybody should do it. It's like, okay, well, I don't know if that's exactly how we should approach learning how to take care of our bodies.
Or in general, and actually, I'm going to get dangerously close to a line here. I think this applies to any type of information consumption, media consumption on any sort of topic, especially in the current day and age where we live in confirmation biases and in information vacuums and fake and lies, right? You have to be careful you have to use the freaking brain in your head and evaluate the merit of a claim, period, whether it's lose 20 pounds or whatever the other stuff floating out there in the world. And I'll actually add another layer to this is, the idea of doing that is also an aspect of our health and wellness and being
Absolutely.
intentional about what you consume and when you consume, because we overconsume and that is not good for our health.
Absolutely. There's a term I love called media hygiene. Like what are you consuming, and are you cleansing your timeline Are you making sure that you're getting rid of interactions that are not benefiting you in your psyche? I mean, we talk about consumption of food, but you have consumption of media too. Is it a clean diet, or is it a pretty dirty maladaptive diet? Second piece here, once you take a look at the claim itself, another layer is to assess the delivery. How is it delivered? Is it positioned within a broader context, or is it taken kind of more as an overwhelming universal truth, regardless of circumstance? Like in all cases, everybody should do X, Y, Z. Or is it positioned within like certain circumstances that would make it more reliable? Is it based on support that it's helping us trigger that emotion, or is it less about emotion and more about facts and data? A lot of times, like we were talking about earlier, it's going to try and prey on your emotion. And you use the term, you hit a nail on the head, it's predatory sometimes. It just wants to get us to react and to make sure that we are safe. Even though we're in 2025, by and large, we're all pretty safe. We got shelter. We got safety. We're just trying to optimize now. Yep. So no longer need to start a fire and run away from the saber-toothed tiger.
Nope.
Another way to look at the delivery is it packaged alongside potential counter arguments or pitfalls, nuance, downsides, or do they just deliver that claim as if it were the be-all, end-all, and they don't necessarily talk about how it could be wrong or how there are some limitations to that claim itself. A specific example, in certain circumstances, it may be good to get some sunlight throughout the day, but someone's saying you should never walk in the sun. Every time you go out in the sun, you should wear SPF 75. I mean, it depends on the context. If you're not getting any sunlight, it'd be good to get some vitamin D. You don't necessarily have to wear SPF 75 every time.
Well, and isn't SPF over 30 kind of pointless? But this is the kind of stuff, like, how outlandish or like shocking are they trying to be in the delivery in order to get you to not question the claim, which comes to a third part that I'm guessing is the who involved here.
Yes. So trying to avoid talking about the who first. That's why I started with the claim. You don't necessarily want to attack a person before looking at the content they're saying, but also understanding the context that that person is living in. Understand the person delivering the claim and their intentions. What are their values? What is their objective? In particular, do they have any incentives like money, influence, power, even prestige or attention? Any incentives to make this outlandish claim outside of just delivering data? If they have an incentive, your antenna should probably go up a little bit just to be a little bit more unawares, just to understand, okay, what are their incentives? Would they necessarily want me to believe this because they could benefit from me believing this? Another thing to think about with the person delivering the claim is if they're exhibiting logical consistency. So a good example of this is, do they hold a claim from someone else to a very high evidence standard, but they have their own claim? It's not subjected to any rigor whatsoever. They just speak it as truth and gospel. Are they logically consistent in how they approach problem solving?
So here's the thing. We are talking about this in the context of health and wellness, but I would go out on a limb and say that what Nolan's talking about in this idea of evaluating claims, merits, delivery, and the people of an offer applies to anything that you might buy in the service and knowledge space. Because there's lots of wool being pulled over eyes out there, and not to like be negative about it, but make sure you are getting real stuff. And in general, here's how I would summarize the idea of, like, does the claim have merit and is it data backed? Does the delivery make sense, and does the person credible? If it's too good to be true, it probably is.
Yep, absolutely.
It's funny how some cliches are still true.
Well, they're all they're all rooted in some truth, right?
Yep.
So
I usually say cliches are cliches for a reason, and usually it's because it's true. And so I want to kind of take this back to the big picture, because we talked really specifically about how to not fall into traps and empty promises, especially when it comes to our health and wellness, because that's, I think, where that happens really significantly, because there's the clear emotional trigger in order to prey on people who want this change really rapidly. And that's where I want to go back to this big picture of, we've established that there isn't this thing that's going to wave a magic wand and make me a size 2. It just ain't going to happen, right? And I have finally come to terms with that. And I just go to the gym a lot to deal with it. But so in thinking about these things, that most results come from hard work, a process, and consistency. How do we wrap our heads around that? And how do we lean into that? And how do we get started to create it?
You get started by just crawling before you walk. That's the best analogy I can think of. I don't want to belabor the auto analogy anymore, so we'll get rid of the car and we'll talk about crawling. You just start really small. And I like thinking about it just because my systems brain is the way it is. I like thinking about it in a couple of different buckets. Buckets related to health and wellness. I mean, nutrition, hydration, movement, sleep recovery, and then mindset. They're all interrelated. This is one big system, like we were talking about earlier, that is self-feeding, self-informing. So taking care of one is going to have benefits on the other. But before you even start considering thinking about one, just know where you're at. Just take a small assessment. How many steps do I get in a day? How many ounces of water do I get? Do I know what types of foods might be better for me than others? How's my sleep? And asking those questions to yourself, establishing a baseline. And then from there, you could take very small micro steps that accumulate over time each week. Once you know your baseline, here's an explicit example. I know that I'm only drinking 64 ounces of water in a day, for example. I want to get that up to over 100. So I'm going to jump from 64 to 75. I'm just going to add a little bit more. And then maybe the next week I'll add 10 more ounces. And if I meet that habit 7 days out of 7, I'm going to jump on 10 more ounces. This is a really simple example, but it's illustrative of the process itself amongst those 5 pillars, that you can start small and it's just going to build on itself, and it's going to be self-feeding. That's the awesome thing. I keep on coming back to that. When you drink more water, you're going to sleep better. When you sleep better, you're going to be able to have more energy to go work out, play with your friends, go for walks, or play with the kids rather, go for walks, things like that. So starting small, and it's going to snowball very quickly.
And that really is that ecosystem. And a couple things that pop into my mind are, I think, to go back to this idea that's like feast or famine, we think about it in the long term. There's a book called The One Thing that for some reason feels very applicable here. Whereas instead of thinking, oh my gosh, I need to lose 10 pounds, so I'm going to have to go to the gym 3 days a week for the next 3 months, and I'm going to have to like cut my calories. Just think, I got to go to the gym tomorrow, or I get to go to the gym tomorrow, because you are an able-bodied person who has that privilege, versus looking at it as a chore. And just, that's the next thing you have to do. Instead of looking at the entire ball of wax, there's this idea of like the first domino that will push all of the others over is just the one thing. And it's less onerous to think about it that way, instead of like, what's that term that I hate, eating the whole elephant one bite at a time type of thing. Yeah. And so like, that's the perfect, like the water example you used, perfect for that. Sleep. I think sleep is the thing most of us overlook. I guess I can't say it anymore because that word has a different term, but I am a very, very rigid about my sleep schedule. 15 minutes. If you don't like your sleep schedule, change it by 15 minutes a night for a week or two until it's where you want. So it's little things that can really add up. You do not have to change your entire life at once. It's like quitting smoking cold turkey. How often does it work?
Yeah, not very often, right? Thinking about bringing it all together too. Thinking about start of a conversation, CrossFit workouts, chipper workouts. You're just chipping away. I'm not thinking about the 100 pull-ups I have to do later in the workout. I'm just thinking about getting through these 25 air squats right now, and then I'll do 25 more, and then 25 more.
Did you have to go Murph with that thought?
Sorry.
Also, I hate
I figured I'd
chippers.
trigger you.
I have actually, and I haven't even told you this, I have actually been doing zone 2 training in order to try to make my, as Jim calls them, little tiny lungs work better on uphill mountain bike climbs. And zone 2 training is wildly different than kill myself at zone 12, high intensity kind of CrossFit workouts that jack your heart rate, especially at high altitude. But find the thing that you enjoy. You know, for me, I would say, gamed the system a little bit in a way by creating forced accountability of finding a place where I could go where people would ask me if I don't show up.
Yeah,
And now,
forcing
after
factors.
5 years, it's a habit. It's a habit, and I willingly go even if I'm alone. But for several years, I needed to know that somebody would wonder where I was if I didn't show up for more than one morning.
That's awesome.
Forced
That's a great
accountability.
built-in forced accountability. I love
It
that.
is, yeah. Yeah. Same thing with in your house, take the junk food out of the house, right? Just you set yourself up for success. And those are small things. So that goes back to this big whole thing. And again, you brought it all back together so well. Chip away. Whether it's 100 pull-ups or putting the chips away, make these small changes. Dad joke, gotta love that. You've heard this a million times. We just don't do it. Taking care of your health, your wellness, and your mind doesn't have to be time consuming. These small things really, really do add up. So as we wrap things up, I'm going to put you on the spot, Nolan, which I know makes you nervous right off the bat. I want your number one health tip.
Sleep, 100%. It's hard to prioritize anything, but I mean, you hit the nail on the head. We were talking about it when you had Mark Gray on. It's so true. Sleep is the first domino to fall in the day because if you get out of bed and you're tired, you're going to lose the ability to have full mental acuity. You're going to be a little bit more scatterbrained. You're going to have less resistance to urges. You're going to want to be more sedentary. You're not going to want to engage in some of the habits that you might have before. And sleep is super simple in concept. Sometimes it's harder in practice, and I can recognize that. But set a consistent schedule. Even if it's 11 p.m. right now for you and 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. or whatever. Set that schedule and then just move it a little bit to get it to where you want it. 11 to 6, for example, move it to 10:45 to 5:45, and then move to 10:30 to 5:30, and just move it a little bit each week, but keep the windows consistent throughout the week if you can, and it's going to set you up for success on all the rest of the pillars that we talked about earlier. Because, like we said, it's all connected. But as you start your day, thinking about chronologically in the day, sleep is the first thing that happens.
Yeah, it's the foundational piece, I would say, but like you said, it's the easiest one to sacrifice. And I love how you talked about, like, when you're tired, you get lazy, which means you don't want to make food, which means the willpower goes out the window because you're going to get the takeout, and then you don't want to actually go be physical. It is this a slippery slope. And I will tell you, I go to bed at 10 o'clock and I wake up at 6 o'clock every single day. On the weekends, maybe I'll go to bed at 10:20 and let myself sleep until 6:30 if I can. But at this point, I can wake up at 5:59 a.m. with no alarm pretty religiously because now I've set this cadence, and it does make everything so much more manageable. Because, the thing that we haven't brought up quite yet, and I'll kind of wrap in here as we close, is this idea of, if you're a high performer, you need energy, you need stamina. We are only given one vessel with which to do that. And if you don't steward it, you're doing yourself a disservice.
Right. Going back to the analogy, if you're not taking care of your car, it's going to break down.
There you go. And nobody wants to pay an auto shop bill. So Nolan, how do we bring our car to your shop? How do we find you? How do we get in touch with you and have you calculate our macros and get your processes and all the things?
Yeah. So a couple different ways. I'm on Instagram, YouTube at Wealth Coaching, WELLTH Coaching, and then also wealthco.com, spelled the same, WELLTH co.com. Reach out, schedule some time, send me an IM, shoot me an email, nolanwealth@gmail.com. Really doesn't matter to me. I just love talking about this stuff. We can talk about your habits, talk about where you're at, where you want to go. And we can systematize it if you're one of those folks who likes systems.
Yeah, and we will have all these links will be in show notes and in the chat. And Nolan and I do enjoy nerding out on behavioral psychology. He comes at it from the health and wellness angle. I come at it from every other angle. And so this is a fun way to bring that together and really just encourage all of you out there on this St. Patty's Day when you're going to go drink green beer and eat probably like corned beef and hash after work. Today is your 20% off. Tomorrow, get back into that routine. Take control of your health. I hope this conversation inspired you to make those small changes. I promise you they will add up. And Nolan, I thank you so much for being here and being that inspiration and sharing some wisdom and how we can do that.
Totally. Thanks for having me.
And for everybody out there, I do want to say happy St. Patty's Day one more time. I may not look like it because I'm mostly Italian, but I got a little Irish in me. So there you go. I hope all of you will take this challenge. I'm actually going to end the podcast today with a challenge. And that is, what is your one small habit this week that you're going to commit to? Drinking more water, sleeping 15 minutes more, getting outside for 10 minutes, ditching the doom scroll. Pick something simple and do it this week to just take a little tiny control of your health and wellness. I'll check in on you next week, see how it's going when I see you for another episode of No More Mondays podcast.